Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome to Penrith, to the Rural Connected Communities workshop with the DCMS in conjunction with UK 5G. Thank you for coming today. It's a great sunny morning. So I think later on, after presentations, for the workshop sessions, we might try and open a few curtains. But that's freaking out Ash, who's filming the sessions there. Thank you for coming today. Great to see so many of you. The purposes of today, I think, are threefold. They're pretty simple, really. Objective number one is for my colleagues at DCMS to share with you the latest information on their thinking around a potential funding call. You'll hear a phrase used quite a lot today, which is ministerial approval. Which is yet to happen, but actually we are thinking pretty certain, subject to that approval, that there will be a funding call around 5G and rural connected communities. And objective number one is for the DCMS guys to give you their latest thinking on that. And I'll be going through the agenda in a few minutes to tell you what will happen throughout the day to do that. Purpose number two, and the reason why we're calling this a workshop, is that we'd also like to hear from you to help input into the design of that competition when it comes through. So my colleague Paul a bit later on is going to run down and give you the latest thinking on the competition design, but really there are some variables there that we want your input on in order to make the competition in order to get the best proposals, in order to get the best projects as possible. So that's objective number two. And objective number three really is to get you guys talking with each other, such that you meet new people, you find out whether you like them, you identify where the project ideas are that perhaps you might want to come together and put proposals in. So please be as socially promiscuous as you can today, meet new people in the room, and we'll be giving you loads of space throughout the day to meet new people and get to hear what they're interested in, such that you might want to join them in a consortium bid. So those are the three objectives of today. All of the slides that are being presented today are going to be available on UK 5G's website. Can we just have a show of hands? Have you heard of UK 5G? Most people. Keep your hand up if you're registered on the website as well. Most people, that's good. Great. Okay. So we'll be making all of the slides from the presentations available. Please feel free to write notes if you want to, or take photos of the screen if slides come up, but don't feel you have to, because we will be sending the slides out. The other thing we're doing today is we are filming all of the presentations today, so we'll be making the edited films of those available on UK 5G also. This workshop is number 3 out of 5 workshops that we're doing across the UK. On Monday we're in Perth in Scotland. On Wednesday, we're in Newport in Wales, and next week we're off to Belfast, and then we're doing another event in Didcot. So what we're planning to do after all of those 5 events is also send to all of the delegates the contact details of everyone who came to all of the 5 events. So if you meet people here but you don't want to go into a project partnership with them, fear not. Over the course of those 5 events, we've got sort of over 400 people, attending those workshops. And if you've registered and said you're happy to share your details under GDPR, then we'll be circulating your contact details to everyone else who attended the events here today. Okay, so I think I just want to quickly go through the agenda for today. You should have a copy as you came in, but I don't know if you can see that. The first part of the day, we'll be talking to you. In a moment, I'll hand over to my colleague Bob Driver, who's head of UK 5G. He's going to just give us a few slides on that organisation. Then we're going to hear from Tony from the DCMS to give you an overview of its 5G testbeds and trials programme. And then he's staying up here on stage to give a kind of considered view about some of the challenges around rural connectivity. There'll be some time for some questions and answers So if you have any questions either about UK 5G or about the DCMS test beds and trial programme or around the challenges, then you'll get an opportunity to ask Tony some questions. And then Paul from DCMS is going to stand up and go through the straw man of how we're thinking about the rural connectivity competition. And again, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions following that presentation. We're then going to break for some refreshments and come back after the break, where before lunch we'll have 2 workshop sessions. The first is really, while Tony's going to give a kind of central government view around challenges of rural connectivity, the first workshop session, we really want to hear from you and some specific examples, because there's an awful lot of experience in the room. We want to hear about your specific examples around the challenges and the opportunities of rural connectivity. And then the final workshop session prior to lunch, we're going to ask you a few questions around competition design so that we can optimise the competition and make it easy, helpful for you to submit proposals. Okay. We're going to then come back after lunch where we have the final workshop session, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And finally, there'll be the opportunity for you guys to come up. It's a bit of an open mic session and just give a presentation about who you are, your organisation, what you might be looking for in a potential proposal into this competition. So if you are interested in giving that pitch over lunch, we've got my colleague Andy Curtis at the back. There he is. If you go and see Andy, if you've got a slide about your organisation, great. If you don't have a slide, no problem. Over the last 2 workshops that we held in Perth and Newport, we've had some fantastic presentations from people just for a couple of minutes saying this is what they're interested in. And they're really, that really did surface a lot of experience and capability in the room. So please do make sure that you speak to people today. The other thing I just have to say is if you are looking for partners beyond the room, then up on UK 5G's website, we have a message board forum where if you're looking for partners, you can go and post your organisational details, what you're looking for, what you can offer up on that website too. And the team at UK 5G, myself, Bob, Andy and others are more than happy to help you meet potential consortium partners. So if you don't find people that you can work with today, come to UK 5G and we can help you do that. Okay, before I invite Bob up on to give a presentation, I think what we'd like to do is just spend 3 or 4 minutes asking you to introduce yourselves to people on your table, because for the first workshop you'll be working together. So I'll give you 5 minutes. If you could say who you are, where you're from, why you're in the room today, and I'll tap the glass and we'll come back in a few minutes. Okay? Off you go. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I hope that broke the ice a little bit and you know a bit more about the people that you sat next to. I'm standing next to Bob Driver from UK 5G, who's going to just give a quick overview about what UK 5G is and how we can help you.
Okay, so hello, Bob Driver. It's very interesting to be asked to be socially promiscuous, isn't it? I've never been asked that before, so I'm very, very interested in that. So it's great to be here. There's a lot of familiar faces and a lot of faces I don't know, and that's fantastic. So I'm just going to spend 5 minutes at the most talking about what UK 5G is and what our purpose is. So, oh look, there's a slide that says what is UK 5G. So what's UK 5G? UK 5G is an organisation that has 3 main aims. One is to support the development of something called an ecosystem. And really what it means is it's a network of networks. There's a huge number of networks that are involved in the development and acceleration of 5G across the country. They might be place-based, they might be sector-based, they might be technology-orientated. And what we're trying to do is provide a network of networks that links people together. We're there to manage information about 5G activities and learning. And we're also here to promote the capabilities of the UK. The UK has a lot to offer in the global marketplace, and also as an inward investment location, 5G is a real plus for the UK. So we're a partnership. The core delivery group of UK 5G is formed of three organisations. One is Cambridge Wireless, which is based in Cambridge, but is a national organisation that enables technology companies to work together and to collaborate in order to network together, to learn about stuff and to grow. And it's based in the telecommunications industry, but has branched out to all aspects of technology. We also have the Knowledge Transfer Network, and John is from the KTN. And that's a national organisation that links together all sorts of different activities and looks at lots of different vertical sectors from an innovation point of view, which is really important from a 5G point of view. And finally, the TM Forum, which is an international organisation that that links together telecommunication organisations globally, particularly from an OSS, BSS side. So it's a partnership that is member-driven. Cambridge Wireless is not-for-profit. TM Forum is a member-driven organisation. The Knowledge Transfer Network is part of the Innovate UK family. So we're there as independent and impartial conveners of this network of networks. And we do it on behalf of the DCMS. We have an advisory board. It's quite a long list there, and you'll be able to find them on the website. But it's an independent advisory board that's drawn from the different aspects of 5G, both from a technology supply side and a market demand side. And it's led by Ros Singleton, who's from UK Broadband Limited, or 3 Broadband as it's now called. So we started about a year ago, and we've grown quite a lot. There's over 1,500 registered users on our website, and I was really pleased to see so many of you put your hands up. There's about 780 organisations involved at the moment, and I think these slides were done a little while ago, so it's probably more like 800 now. And lots of projects and what have you. We've even produced a magazine to celebrate the phase 1 trials after a year of operation. And so it's a very vibrant network. We're there to help develop the network of networks across the UK. One of the things that the advisory board is doing is creating working groups. And let me see if I can remember the nature of the working groups that we're instituting at the moment. We're looking at a working group that looks at LEPs and SME stimulation across the country. We're looking at a working group to connect places together, looking at places, basically looking at barriers for local authorities, things like that. We're looking at an international working group to develop links between the UK and other organisations overseas. We're looking at a manufacturing working group and a testbed and trials working group as well. So a lot of activity happening, and all those working groups are drawing from registered users. So a number of you might well have got involved in participating in those working groups. We very much want a network that's vibrant and that is self-driven, as it were. So if you're not involved, please get involved. You can register easily on the UK 5G site. You can provide and upload content about your organisation or your business if you think it's relevant, and you can send any queries to hello@UK5G. And I hope that you enjoy today. It's really important and significant project that's going to be initiated here. And of course, we also have a lot of information on the site about the different trials that are being funded and supported by the DCMS. And it's great to see on the phase 1 trials here that you can see listed that a couple of them have already been focusing on rural connectivity or rural issues, rural innovation. And I'm sure that Tony will be talking a bit more about that. So thanks a lot, and hope you have a good day.
Thank you. I'll just end this show. And call up the next one. So I'd like to welcome up Tony Scales from DCMS. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, John. So just before we go any further, please feel free to tweet and use your social promiscuity over the wires, over the wireless. We're using a hashtag 5GRCC, so please feel free to use that and tell your friends you're here. Send them photographs of whatever you like. We've got. I mean, there's always that moment when you decide to organise a party. When kind of half an hour before the party nobody's turned up, and you get that kind of worry: have we sent the wrong address? Have we, nobody wanted to come because they don't like us. And then when the room fills up and that buzz sort of fills the room, you think, yes, we got it right. So people do want to come, and they do want to come and talk about 5G in rural environments. And I think there really is a significant movement now across the UK for people who want to get this done. So I'm going to talk about the government's programme, a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing. Some of you will be very familiar with the programme already. Others, I know, are new to it. So bear with me if you already feel you know it all. And stop me if I get too boring on it. Okay, so this is the kind of programme mission, if you like. Build, foster and lead are the three watchwords of what we do. So the first is build the business case. If you, like me, were looking at the 5G market about 18 months ago, there was a huge amount of scepticism from lots of people in the market, from the mobile network operators, even some of the equipment vendors, about whether 5G was going to be a thing, whether it was going to be economically viable. Everybody was worried about very high deployment costs, whether there was real demand for what we're doing in 5G and whether 5G would take off. We'll roll forward 18 months and we've now got all 4 of our UK mobile network operators with either already launched in the case of EE, launching next month in Vodafone, and the other 2 shortly to follow. So by the end of this year, this calendar year, all 4 will have live commercial 5G networks. So to me, that's a massive change in what we're doing. But it's still early days. The 5G standard has only covered one dimension of the 3 major chunks of what 5G is about. So we've still got to get to the massive connectivity of machines, and we've got to get to the ultra low latency parts of the standard and equipment that can support all of that. So we're still in the what they call enhanced mobile broadband part of the standard, which essentially addresses the experience that you get on your handset, your 5G handset, which will allow you to do a lot more with what you've got there, but and addresses some of the capacity and speed issues of network connections. But 5G is about a lot more than that, and we'll come to some more of that as we go through. But building that business case is absolutely critical, because even though the operators have started to roll out, it's quite a tentative rollout. You'll have noticed that it is very city centre focused. It's very urban, and it's very subscriber focused, as in consumer. Okay, so where I think the industry believes and really wants to see us working is what happens beyond that. What happens with the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything, depending on whose marketing literature you read. But actually, I think that's where all the exciting stuff is, and it's where a lot of our phase 1 trials have focused their energies so far. So we think there's already good emerging evidence that there will be a case, but we've got to also look at not just the new usage cases, but also the other side of the case, which is the cost of rollout. Okay, so that's a lot of what we've got to focus on. So foster the development of the ecosystem. So running events like this, working through UK 5G primarily as our channel to all of you, but also coming out of the Whitehall bubble, where I know that a lot of people think that policymakers spend an awful lot of time talking to each other and inhaling their own kind of fumes. So we like to come out here a lot, and actually our team spends a lot of time on the road, coming and finding out and listening to what you out in the market are telling us, what you're telling each other, and listening to those conversations so that we get a real sense of where the market is actually, rather than where the journalists might think it is and where the media might promote. And the last part is lead the way in the UK 5G R&D, and we do that primarily through competitions. We run funding calls with competitions attached to choose and select the best ways to spend government money or public money on finding out what's going to work. In that process, of course, it is R&D. In that process, we expect to find both successes and things and failures, things that won't work. And finding out the things that don't work is just as important as finding out the things that do. So far, we seem to have found a lot of things that do work, however. So that's quite an interesting position to be in. Okay, so where's the policy background? Back in March 2017, we published a 5G strategy. This is all kind of linking 5G back to the industrial strategy and to the policy framework of government. But the key message in there was that we wanted to put the UK at the forefront of 5G development and not a trailing player in the world. So it's very important that we wanted to do that. The government put its money where its mouth was in the National Productivity Infrastructure Fund in the autumn 18 statement, £200 million allocated to the programme, twinned with another 200 million for the local full fibre networks programme. That's not an accident, because all of you in the room are probably aware that mobile networks only deal with the radio bit at the end of the story. So all of the backhaul that connects those mobile devices to the services that they need has to go through a fixed network at some point. I think we're starting to see some interesting challenges or interesting opportunities where the radio part of 5G, fixed wireless access in particular, is starting to challenge some of those previous assumptions that radio is always going to be slower than fibre and it's never going to have the same ability to challenge. We're starting to see some points where that balance is changing, and we're starting to see people using wireless to do a lot more backhaul and a lot more connection of network together, as well as the endpoints. Okay. Future Telecoms Infrastructure Review. Who's read the Future Telecoms Infrastructure Review? Okay, so lots of people here still with an opportunity to get some really good bedtime reading. It's actually a really important document. It sets out the government's stall for the next 30 years of digital infrastructure deployment and policy for the UK. And it says a number of really important things. Firstly, it sets out the stall for fibre and 5G as being the future. It recognises the fact that copper has got us a long way, but it's now got us to the point where we need to get rid of it. We need to replace it with full fibre. And that's an absolute policy statement. Interesting to see one of the contenders for the Tory party leadership promoting an even faster rollout of fibre. So we're more power to him on that front. We'll see how he gets on and how practical the aspiration is, but it's good to see the aspiration. Key things, in addition, though, are that whilst we recognise that our regulated environment and our current marketplace has been successful in getting us this far. There is now a lot of room for market expansion, for new players to come into the game, and to look at new models for deployment, new models for infrastructure sharing in particular, to mean that we get a different cost of deployment, different cost of operations, means we can do more in more places. But we also need to keep that. We need that market expansion to be in a competitive tension as well. That's good for all of us. So, next bit is just. This is a slightly different picture of 5G from the one you will have seen if you've read all the 3GPP and the ITU type descriptions of it, which is the traditional three-cornered, the triangular model that has enhanced mobile broadband at the top. It has massive machine-to-machine communications, and it also has the ultra-low latency and ultra-high reliability as three corners of the triangle. This is an Ericsson picture, which I rather like because it differentiates between massive IoT and critical IoT. It's a very different position for when you've got a network requirement for a sensor in a culvert that's checking for at some point that the flow rate on that has got blocked, or the that sensor doesn't matter if it doesn't work all the time perfectly. It needs to work fairly regularly, but if it drops out every now and again, that's not a massive issue. Whereas my pacemaker, I don't have one, but if I did and it was network connected, I want to know that it was there all the time. If I was driving an autonomous vehicle that relied on communications with other vehicles, I'd want to know that was actually highly reliable and highly low latency. That would be a very important thing. So I think this is a good picture for me of 5G because it does even more starkly show you that a single physical network needs to be able to support multiple different use cases and different styles of deployment and different uses. We have got enhanced mobile broadband in there. Very important to all of us that we get better experience of our mobile devices wherever we are. And I think that it's the wherever we are bit that we need to see more ubiquitous coverage more of the time. You can be sitting in a very dense urban environment that looks like it's got your 4 bars or whatever it is of coverage, but actually there's no capacity behind that. So you can be literally, I mean, my daily commute when I'm in Westminster takes me through some of the most densely covered areas of the country, but I still can't carry a call between Whitehall and Embankment Tube. So it's just really important that we get the difference between coverage and connectivity and effective connectivity to do the job I need to do at the time I need to do it. Fixed wireless access also I think is a really important use case. Again, we've seen some of our phase 1 competition entries working very closely on connecting up homes and properties and premises in rural environments and in urban environments in different ways using that. The numbers in the bubbles, by the way, refer to what Ericsson reckons the market is worth to the mobile operators or to the operator environment. Up to the mobile operators to work out how they capture that and how much they foster an ecosystem of players around them that captures it collectively. They haven't been enormously successful at growing their revenues and their profitability over the last couple of generations of mobile. I think they're all working very hard on how they work with this community and others to make sure that they capture more of it in the future. So just
I'm assuming that's a global market,
yes,
not Western Europe or whatever.
I believe that's global market. It was presented in the Ericsson presentation to the world, so I'm assuming that, yeah. This is a picture that when I first started in DCMS, I tried to draw out what I thought the ecosystem looked like for 5G. You can see there's a bunch of people selling stuff, there's a bunch of people buying stuff, and there's some enablers in the middle. So I'm sure all of you in the room will work out where you fit on this picture. Some of you will fit in multiple boxes, but it's a complicated, it's a big environment to address. To get success, real success, deep, effective, widespread 5G deployment in the UK, we need all of the players here to work together to make it happen. So just make that point, and that's very much what Bob and John and the team at UK 5G are focused on, is how they make that all work. You may notice that we don't have any mobile network operators in the room today. I just want to address that point at the moment. We are in dialogue with the mobile operators at the moment about the provision of a shared rural network. That is an ongoing discussion. I can't say any more about it today because it's still to be completed. But that's why we've separated the conversations for the moment. When those conversations come to a conclusion, which I hope will be not too far off, then we will bring them into the discussion. Okay, so you'll all have an opportunity to engage with operators as you need to. So I talked about this already, the evidence of the UK's 5G ecosystem evolving and moving. The chart shows a number of deals which a number of the operators the equipment vendors have been doing, supporting the rollout of 5G. What's really interesting is where we started with 4G, I think number 50 something in the world in our deployment, we are now in the top 4 or 5 countries in the world rolling out production 5G. So we are in a very different place from where we were. That's a very clear statement of government intent and of the industry's appetite for working with us in the UK. It's up to all of us to make it really, really good for them to come and work here and continue to invest here. But don't be fooled. It's not an easy market to work in. This is I think probably it's in the top 1 or 2 most competitive mobile markets in the world, which means margins are thin for operators as they stand. So we've got to work with them on that. On the programme, we've got a load of projects we're doing. We're talking today about the top end of this pyramid, which is the Connected Communities projects. One is the Urban Connected Communities project, which we're currently now working in deployment mode and delivery mode in the West Midlands. You may be involved in it, some of you, and you may be, we'll start to hear things. Actually, we hit the press yesterday. Both ITV and BBC News carried items on the first 5G transmission of and two-directional control of an ultrasound scanner from a connected ambulance, actually in trial mode, in a mock-up, but with a real consultant, real A&E consultant and a real paramedic. I actually went and did the trial myself and experienced it. Absolutely amazing, and a very, very different experience from what you could have done before 5G. So exciting. We've done stuff in primary research with the universities. We've done 5G test beds, well represented in the room today. We've got people from both 5Grit, Daniel and others. We've got people from Rural First here. Put your hands up. Loads of people here. Yeah, okay, so loads of people with experience around your tables. So use them to understand how to work with DCMS to provide successful competitions. All of these competition projects have been successful and have delivered. And continue to deliver. So we have extended both their timeframes and their grants so they can do more. So very exciting to be working with them. We've got a good range of use cases from health in Liverpool, smart tourism in Bristol and Bath, Worcestershire manufacturing, and Auto Air down in doing CAV vehicle testing at high speeds in Millbrook. Talked about the urban one already. And then there are some other projects coming. So if you're interested in beyond rural, just have a quick look at this slide. 5G security. So if you're a security freak and that really excites you, then come and talk to us. Or if it concerns you as well, not just if you're really good at doing it, but if you've got some interesting perspectives on security, let us know. UK Korea, we're doing some international work as well with different international organisations, the peer group of UK 5G in Korea. We've got transportation projects. We're working on roads and rail stuff. Very difficult environment to work in. I'm interested in, the question I'd pose is it better to work with roads and rail authorities, the people who run the roads and rails, or is it more important to work with the the local authorities that roads and rails run through. Because there are two different ways of getting coverage onto roads and rail, and one of them might be it's better to cover it from the countryside where the road or rail runs through, where you own the property. And in actual fact, most of the roads, certainly in England and Wales, are owned by and run by local authorities, not by Highways England or anybody like that. So I'm interested in that question. And finally, we're about to launch, virtually in parallel with this competition, a sector test beds and trials competition as well. So look out for that. That's very specifically initially targeted at manufacturing and logistics. Lots of manufacturing I know goes on in rural environments as well, and there's a lot of logistics that pass through rural environments and support them. So don't feel that these are exclusive. You can work in both environments. That's that one. I think from Andy at the back, I'm bang on time, so that's a good start to the day. Now I have to work out how to kill this presentation and start the next one. Here we go. Okay. So when we started out the Connected Communities projects, we ran a call for views to the marketplace, which many of you, I'm sure, will have responded to. And there were a number of different key findings that came back from that call for views. The first one was do things. It's great that you've funded universities and you've funded these kind of smaller scale phase one projects. Each of those, by the way, substantially in their own right, but they had a kind of 12-month window initially to fund. So they said, do things at scale. So do things, bigger things, do things that take a bit longer to do, maybe a couple of years, 2 or 3 years to run, and treat rural treat geography with respect. In other words, urban is very different from rural. It has different topology, different economics, different use cases, and different ways of doing things. And the people in rural places, they're a funny old lot. You'll have to work out how to deal with them. Okay, so where are we with rural connectivity and coverage now? As I said earlier, we were, in 2012, we were 54th in the world to launch 4G, which for the 5th largest economy in the world is probably not where we should be. It's also, for those of us who've been in the industry a while, I think when I started in telecoms back in the early 80s, there were no Gs, it was fixed. But the UK was one of the countries in the world, one of the few countries in the world that was really doing big research, big work in digital connectivity to change all that and to bring us mobile and bring us the kind of digital infrastructure we've got today. So we've come a long way, but a lot of progress still to do. 91% of UK's landmass has access to, quotes, good 4G mobile coverage from at least one operator. Now, these are Ofcom Connected Nation figures, so I won't comment other than that's your view of how you should interpret those is. What I do know is that there are a number of places we've been talking to, Paul and I have been talking to over the last few months, some of whom are probably here today, who've invested in their own activities to go and measure what they really experience, because there can be quite a big difference between what a model tells you or what the M&Os tell you or what you experience yourself. What I know is that if I'm driving around the country and I've got Vodafone coverage, my wife has EE, other mobile network operators are available, I will see a very different picture of connectivity depending on which one I'm on. And that changes again with the other factor which I mentioned earlier, which is about capacity. So you can have coverage, but the capacity doesn't support what you need. That's, however, there's still, you can go and measure a mobile signal, 91% of the landmass, and it will show up, which is certainly much better than we were. 66%, which is probably more what you actually experience, is what you get from all 4 mobile network operators. That's probably closer to what you're really experiencing. So user experience is different from the scientific measurement always. And the Superfast program and Superfast broadband working with the market and government working together, we've now reached in December 2017, 95% of premises in the UK have Superfast coverage, up from 45% in 2010. So in 7 years, that's a big difference. But could we go faster? Could we go better? That's the question. And this is the thing that I think we really need to focus on in our program that we're going to do now, is this divide, this difference between discrepancy between rural and urban, because in a sense, it's an obvious thing for mobile network operators to go and focus on busy city centres. They know that wherever they put a mast up, there's likely to be people who are going to use it regularly, and there's going to be a return on that investment, very obviously. In the rural environment, that's not so clear. When in the internet of sheep or the internet of mountainsides, where there aren't even any sheep in some cases, why are you putting mobile coverage there? Who's going to use it? I think our experience, and I'll come to a couple of experiences later, even though government has sometimes invested in infrastructure, literally it's had no use. So we've got to be careful about how far we go with that and what our aspiration is, and how do we get creative about driving demand. And so that 9% of UK land mass, that's the opposite to the sum of the 91 and whatever, the previous slide. No good 4G coverage from any operator. It's improved from 21% a year ago, but still lots of rural areas very badly affected. 39,000 homes and businesses can't access decent fixed or mobile coverage. That's clearly a big gap. In urban, good 4G data services, at least 2 megabits. Who thinks that 2 megabits is good? Okay. I'm not commenting, just asking the question. To 83% of premises, rural only 41%, so half the number roughly. Areas affected include not just remote rural, not spots, but also semi-rural. So places that you would expect to be able to use your mobile with reasonable freedom have either poor or patchy coverage. And I think that's one of the other opportunities here. And of course, all of our lives have transformed since 3 and 4G came along. We now expect our Google Maps to work. We expect our email and our WhatsApp and all the other connective things that allow us to do our jobs more effectively, to move around freely, to find our way, to get to work, to get to meetings, to meet our friends and so on, and to go shopping, to fill in our tax forms. All of that stuff is something we expect to do. We don't expect that old modem sound in the background ticking away saying, connection coming sometime soon. We want it to be now. And we want to close this urban-rural divide. I think, there's been about a several hundred-year trend of people moving from countryside to cities. And the money's gone with it. So the investment in local banks, post offices, entertainment, and social networks, social services has gone with it. Wouldn't it be better if we had a more balanced economy that had the ability for people to work and play and be educated and gather in rural environments? There are certainly plenty of people who still live in the countryside, but the idea that becomes very clear if you run the Superfast program. Several people here I know have been involved in that over the years. Whenever you put a connection into the local pub, the local school or whatever it is, and you make that available on a shared basis to the community, suddenly half a dozen businesses start up. And that happens, that's a very important factor of what we're trying to do here is how do we stimulate stuff which isn't happening now but could happen if we put the connectivity there. How do we aggregate that demand so that it becomes economically viable? So what are the barriers? There's some historic reasons. Limits on mast heights. If you go to Europe, you'll find very much larger masts in rural areas. You'll see that, and that means wider coverage. It's just simple physics. You start beaming out radio waves from a higher height. They reach further. Propagation's easier. We also in the UK, we've always prized and valued our environment and our environmental credentials very highly. Sometimes the balance between that and deploying an effective digital infrastructure, so maybe the balance on that needs to be looked at. Also, I think there has been quite a lot of NIMBYism. People, it's great, we can have a lovely digital infrastructure, but please don't put it in my field or in my back garden. And I think that's, it's perfectly understandable, but it actually can hold us back quite a lot. And I think the other thing is we've seen quite a lot of kind of community type efforts to build out mobile and fixed infrastructure. To be sustainable, they need support from the bigger players. So it's great to have a community and carrier grade mix, but you need them to work collaboratively and collectively so that we can afford to run the national network at the right price. So carrier grade is important. Otherwise, the maintenance doesn't get done. The OPEX isn't supported properly. In rural, of course, we have a geography that's very much more challenging than in other areas. Very long distances, very mountains, dare I say, that stand up and get in the way of line of sight of mobile signals. Weather. Seen some great pictures of what a storm in Orkney can do to a mobile mast. It costs quite a lot to put it up, but when a hurricane comes through and rips it down, you've got to start again, and you've got to get people there to go and do it, and it's expensive. I think again, as we come, so this time of year, it all looks very optimistic. As we get towards winter, and you're asking people to run projects to deploy infrastructure out there, physically, there's a sort of shutdown period of several months when you can't go and do it. So when you're planning projects, you've got to think about that very, very carefully. Mobile network operators, obviously, they've got higher costs for backhaul and installation. So on backhaul is a big part of the cost. Digging trenches, laying fibre, getting permission to do that, paying rents, paying rates. They're all factors in the economics of mobile networks. And I think it's something like, if you look at the cost breakdown of a mobile network operator, 10% roughly is in running the central organisation and the systems that kind of manage consumers, customer accounts and so on. 90% is actually out in the field. So you've got to think about which bit of this are you going to affect most by the actions you take as local authorities and as partners in the rural environment. So we need to think about how we can help them. Population density clearly less, so number of people using services, and focus on the word people at the moment, but we're going to try and shift that so it's not just people we're connecting, but many more kinds of services. I think that's the big opportunity here. Sorry, there was a little bit there. Last words on the community resistance. UK 5G has been doing a very good job of trying to educate people in what 5G is and what it isn't. And we have seen a little bit of an upsurge in people talking about 5G as being a potential health risk. We all need to be aware of that. UK 5G has put out some guidance, so please look at that and use it where you need to help. If you've got community resistance, I think that will be helpful, but I think we also need to do more. I think as an ecosystem, we need to do more to help resolve those issues and make sure people are clear that the deployments we're doing are safe. So couple of lessons from the past. Who knows about or has been involved in Mobile Infrastructure Project, MIP? Was it a resounding success? No. Okay, this is an example of central government saying, okay, we're going to go and fix this. We're going to put some technology out there. We're going to put some money down and go and deploy some kit, and that'll solve the problem. So 2011, 150 million put on the table to go and invest in new mobile masts in the places we would like to put them as part of this, see them put as part of this project. Evaluation saw lots of potential benefits, which we'll focus on shortly in one of the workshop sessions about what good things could come from it. But the ambition of 575 sites resulted in only 75 sites being built, and instead of 60,000 premises being covered, only 7,000, just over 7,000 got covered. And the costs of those, therefore, were hugely higher than they should have been. And even at the end of the project, only 63 of the 75 sites were financially viable. So, 63 of the 75 were actually financially unviable. So a very small number actually came out as paying their way. Now, we need to go back. We need to learn from the project as to why the cost base the way it was, why the operators weren't interested in adopting and managing the sites, because the principle was, we needed at least one anchor tenant on each site, each one anchor operator who would go and operate it, and there was no interest. So that's why our conversation with the operators today on shared rural network is quite a difficult conversation, but it is one that we believe we're making progress in. So I think that there's a lot to be done here, and it comes back to that first slide, the build the business case piece. We've got to work out how we can reduce the costs of deployment, make it as easy as possible to do, whilst making sure we maximise the revenues available. I think just one more point there. Don't just give people technology and expect them to use it. Make sure there's a pull from the market, and that all parts of the market are ready to adopt it and use it. Don't just try and push. National roaming. Sounds like a great idea. You go to Italy, you go to Spain with your UK mobile, and you experience the maximum amount of coverage that you could get because you roam between the local networks freely. In the UK, you can't do that because you're tethered to your own network provider, and if you can't see your network, you don't get any network. So the theory is enable national roaming, and all of the partial spots at least get effectively full coverage for everybody. That met a huge amount of resistance from the mobile network operator community. And you can kind of understand why in a way. If you are the operator that's invested most strongly in wide coverage, that's your USP, you've spent a lot of money on doing it, and then somebody makes you carry the traffic of the other ones who haven't bothered, then they get the user benefit of that, the customer experience benefit of it, without having to pay the money. Now, so operating that environment is not cheap for the operators, and it does cause them some technical issues. I think we can talk more about how that could be mitigated and how things could be done differently, so that we get a different outcome from that kind of approach. But certainly shared infrastructure models, very much part of the FTIR recommendations, and very much what we like to see people thinking about in rural connected communities projects. Areas of progress. How many people are aware of the Electronic Communications Code? Decent show of hands. Right. Okay. So this is part of the Digital Economy Act 2017, where, again, government took the view that there was too much friction in the digital infrastructure marketplace, and wanted to rebalance so that communities took a slightly different view of digital infrastructure. I think a lot of councils, cash-strapped, and in some cases very difficult financial circumstances, look at mast sites, places to put things, physical bits of digital infrastructure as revenue-raising opportunities, and they go to try and maximise those revenues. Naturally, they're trying to raise cash. It's a natural thing for councils to need to do because they've got to pay for services that they've got to deliver. So it's understandable. But the problem with that approach is if that puts the brake on people putting digital infrastructure out there, you can't then use that to drive economic growth and to drive down the cost of delivering services. So this is, the Digital Economy Act was very much about how do we shift that balance and make it easier to get the kit in the ground, get coverage for all kinds of digital services as widely as possible at the minimum cost. So the ECC is the codification of that process, and it sets out guidelines and rules for how much you should be charging for sites and so on, and for how you should go about it. Those changes are now being tested in the courts. So far, very successfully. Particularly, I've seen a number of boroughs where sites were being charged at tens of thousands of pounds a year, coming down to 1,000. So quite a significant change in the economics of deployment. But alongside that, reforms in terms of notice time periods that people have to give, responsiveness of landowners and of local authorities to support particularly both fixed and mobile industries' needs. But it's still early days, and what we want is everybody here to think about how they do that, work with us in government to reduce that friction. Okay, nearly at the end. Okay, so the planning regime is changing as well alongside that. Masts now up to 25 metres rather than 15. That's a very significant increase. But again, do we need to go further? Do we need to give people more rapid access to sites? Do we need to make people, how far do we need to go in order for us to be able to make that investment case everywhere? That's clearly that's England at the moment focused. We're in England today, so I can say that fairly safely, even though I know we've got a few interlopers from across the border here today. Scottish Government's also planning in a planning review as well, as part of their Mobile Activity Action Plan. Future Telecoms Infrastructure Review we've talked about. There's a digital infrastructure toolkit on our DCMS website. So if you are a local authority or people working with local authorities and you want to go and get some advice, some how to go about things to make things easier, go and have a look at that. Please look at, comment on and try and adopt those recommendations. One of the big things is for mobile operators is we've got about 500 odd local authorities and about 500 different systems and methods of going about acquiring permissions and getting way leaves and so on to go and do things in the marketplace. So if we had one system countrywide, that was automated and online, that would make a massive difference to the time it takes and the cost in those operators to get things out there. So have a think about how that works for you and how it works for your relationship with those guys. Rural Gigabit Connectivity Scheme, the RGC, confusingly, very close to ours. Actually, the people who run it, literally across the corridor from us. These two things, we need to think about how we collaborate in projects and in our future deployments to see how we can use the fibre which RGC is going to put out alongside mobile. And to support both mobile and the community connectivity. Also things like this, Church of England, you probably read Church of England Spires, doing a nice scheme alongside which DCMS worked on to stick mobile antenna on the top of those. Excellent initiative. Emergency Services Network you may know about. That's, again, another important way of getting coverage out there. Need to work with EE on how to get that to be fully open and shareable. Ofcom consultations on spectrum, Scottish infill, R100 programs all going well. Need to think about how we can use this program to help them. And this program with challenging areas. So I'll leave you with one picture. Thank you to the Rural First people in the room. This is just to give people a bit of food for thought, because when you come up on the train into Cumbria, you see a lot of fields and sheep and cows, but what you're not necessarily aware of is, what opportunities there might be beyond agri-tech for rural coverage to have some things to go and do and resolve. So this picture is, I think, a great illustration of both different technologies and different approaches to delivering tech and how it's used. And that's what I think also our friends in 5GRIT have spent a lot of time thinking about 5G rural infrastructure. Daniel, what is it? Integrated testbed, thank you. So again, lots of ideas, lots of thinking. We welcome your engagement in the programme. Have a great day the rest of the today. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Paul, who's going to tell you about the... Oh, you're going to do Q&A. Okay, I've got to answer questions.
Do Q&A.
Okay, well, I'll stay.
Thank you, Tony.
There? And you,
Well, why don't you stay there?
I'll stay here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you. Tony's given you loads of information. So thank you for that. There's an opportunity for you guys to ask questions both on the 5G testbed, but also on some of the challenges around rural connectivity. So please, if I could ask you to do two things. First, when you put your hands up for questions, wait for the microphone, because we are filming the presentations with the Q&A today. If you could also say your name, please, and which organisation you're from. And finally, if you could just make sure there's a question mark at the end of your question, that would be helpful. Thank you. So Andy, this gentleman here had a question.
Hello, yes, working. Barry Ford, Broadband for the Rural North. I've seen some references recently to the suggestion that Ofcom might make some spectrum available in the 3 gig band for low-powered local use. Is that something that's likely to happen? I mean, we'd be very interested in becoming an MNO, but only in a localised sense. But I'm not sure whether that is just people running hairs or whether it's a realistic option.
Okay. There are definitely ongoing conversations with between DCMS and Ofcom on use of spectrum in lots of different areas, and in potentially use of some shared spectrum and of allocations of spectrum for uses other than necessarily traditional MNO use. Which bands those will be in and so on, and where those conversations will land up is beyond my pay grade at the moment, and I would be stepping outside my remit if I said where I thought it would land. But there is a lot of conversation going on, and we're certainly happy to keep the conversation going with you and others in the market to keep you appraised of where we've got to. But I think there is for instance, part of the ECC has got some provisions which say that if you aren't using the spectrum you've bought as an MNO, in some areas that might be something you should consider sharing, or in fact might be mandated to share.
Yeah, sorry, can I put a trailer on that?
Yeah.
I mean, what we're particularly interested in is we find that in the rural areas we are in, that although there is nominally coverage from 4G, you find with stone walls, things like that, block it.
Yeah.
A lot of our customers actually put femto cells on their broadband connection to get a signal in the house.
Yep.
So if you could have a low-powered say 3 gig, which would penetrate nicely in properties as a sort of femto cell, that it would be well worth looking into that
Yeah.
if the spectrum was there.
Those kinds of solutions would, yeah, absolutely. I think we should say the competition is open house for trialing those kinds of things. We can show that they're successful and economically viable with a sustainable outcome, then absolutely we would be interested in hearing them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
There's a question here, Andy, at the front.
Jonathan Harris from Cumbria County Council. Tony, you mentioned the problems with the mobile infrastructure project earlier, and the Scottish Government has learned the lessons from that and is successfully undertaking a 4G infill programme. But the DCMS policy is not to fund 4G. And whilst there's other initiatives that you've mentioned, I think there'll still be gaps in 4G coverage, despite the SRN, despite the Emergency Services Network. How do you see 5G working in those rural areas when they haven't even got 4G infrastructure?
Yeah, good question. I think my view of 5G is 5G comes with a tagline which is all about convergence. So we eventually, I mean, and this is the 3GPP view of the world, is 4G will eventually be consumed into 5G, so it will become one harmonized network environment, or a HETnet, if you like, which manages lots of different connectivity components across a single core. That's something which I think, if you listen to the way the MNOs and BT, Vodafone, etc., they're all thinking the same thing, that they're trying to move beyond a G and thinking about how do we get capacity and coverage out as far as we can to the edge. So I think there is we are looking at, and this program here, this project we're talking about today, is a way of us thinking about how we might go about addressing some of those issues. 5G, if we look at 5G as strictly the little narrow thing called 5G new radio, I think we're on a hiding to nothing. If we look at 5G as an expansive standard of convergence, that really does help us to think about things in a different way. And I think it means that we can address your kind of concerns with lots of creativity, and where we bring together a community of small providers, big providers into an ecosystem where the goal is everybody gets coverage everywhere. Okay, so that's our goal. I think in terms of forming policy, the point about the 5G Test Beds and Trials programme is it's part of a policy unit, part of the digital infrastructure policy unit, so that it does two things. It tests policy, and it also informs policy very directly. So if we find when we're in these conversations that there's a gap that we can clearly identify and work out a policy answer to, and it may be that you'll have noticed from the road trip we're doing, we're visiting all parts of the UK. We're trying to find out what's working well in different places and bringing that back to the centre to say, okay, right, let's try and learn from different areas and make sure that we build that learning into our overall answers. Okay.
Thank you. Are there
Thanks.
any other questions? There's one at the front, Andy. Yeah. We've just got time for a couple more questions. So,
Hello, Andy Todman, Age UK West Cumbria. My question is about fuel poverty in rural areas. Smart meters. I live in an area, we've had 2 surveys, and despite the best intentions, I can't have a smart meter, even with hunting sims, because we have no coverage in 4G or whatever. So to challenge 2 things, one, in all your presentation, the smart meter rollout is a significant aspiration of all governments to address the fuel poverty issues. Is there any conversation going on between the folk in 5G and the people doing the smart meter rollout? Question 1. Question 2, regarding the 91% coverage, I tell you what, you can do a Bobby Basic appraisal of those areas where they haven't been able to do the smart meter rollout because of lack of connectivity, and then you've got the challenge of is that 91%? Okay. And the third point, regarding the coverage, fibre to a green box, street furniture is not connectivity to the home. Okay, so those are 3 questions, sir.
well,
Okay,
the last one wasn't a question.
All right, well, yes,
So,
Well,
yeah,
sort of
but
was it?
and-
I'll treat it as a question.
Yeah.
So So first things first. I'm glad to say that smart meters is not my remit in DCMS, and it's not part of DCMS's remit, but it is part of government's remit. So on behalf of government, I'll try and give you a view on it. I think there is part of the, you're right, it is a clear part of the FTIR policy that we get to as close to 100% coverage geographically and in terms of premises as we possibly can. And the outside-in part of aspiration of FTIR is we start with the places that have no coverage first. So where every previous programme has said, let's start with the easiest places first and then see where we get to, we have said that we recognise there is a rural divide and that we want to make sure that places that have nothing get coverage first. And that's not associated with any other particular government programme of digitisation, but clearly would cover smart meters as part of its aspiration. So if you say whether I want to be able to get do my homework in my house, I want to be able to get healthcare in my home, or whether I want to measure my energy use, all of those things would be covered by the same policy approach. So it's a broad policy aspiration, and I think that the way we're going about it recognises that there is a problem and that recognises that there is a divide that we need to address. So yes, we hear you. Yes, we are trying to get it right. And yes, we welcome through this programme your involvement in trying to help us to solve that problem. Okay?
Thank you.
Did I answer all three bits?
No, because the coverage, right?
Well, hang you're not marked it. Take it offline, yeah, because
Over coffee, we'll have another
Thank
chat.
you, Andy,
Okay.
though, for the question.
Thanks. Good
So
questions.
We've got time for one last question, so I'll take it from the gentleman at the back. And I know you want to ask a question, but we'll have time after Paul's presentation too. Yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm Steve Smith from Northumberland County Council. Just to further the comment we got from Cumbria about existing mobile connectivity. I totally appreciate what you're saying about 5G not just being about that mobile infrastructure and it being a converged network, but one of the figures you gave in one of your earlier slides was around areas where there is no super fast coverage and where there is also no mobile coverage on a 4G network. So I think the convergence element of 5G, unless you do something about one or other of those or both, there is not going to be any convergence in those areas, and they will still remain in the rural areas way behind the people in the urban areas. So I'd be really interested to hear what the plans are to try and make that converged network a possibility.
Okay, so I think there's probably a couple of different dimensions to the answer. The first one is to try and is to explore the capabilities that 5G brings us, and make sure people understand what the potential is. Design experiments, which are trials, such as the ones we're asking you to come forward with today, to explicitly address those kinds of challenges. So there are some very clever technology people in the room who can help you to explain to you what that, if you're a local authority. Local authorities' jobs are not necessarily to be technology experts, but they need to know how to get services deployed at a decent cost and to the whole of their territory. And if they don't have the coverage, you're right. There's a big challenge. But I think that we need to look at the full range of what 5G offers. And we saw the 4 boxes of 5G. Those probably cover 20% of what 5G can do. So there's loads of other technology tweaks and ideas. I think we work with Mansour Hanif, who's the CTO of Ofcom now. Probably some of you will know. Probably one of the cleverer people I know. On the design of the program, he came up with a list of about 3 pages of potential technology options from 5G where we can start to address just the tech side of getting that coverage out there at a better cost. and came up with some good ideas about different business models and different approaches. And now he's at the other end of the policy piece here of implementing the policy and the regulation. So I think we've got now a very good relationship to help us to explore those opportunities in the round to get to better coverage for all. Okay, so that's probably doesn't answer very clearly what the question you're asking, but I believe it is, the point about convergence is it should get coverage at lower cost to more places. And that's why I think it can work.
Thank you, Tony. We
Yep.
must move on. I know that there are a few other questions, but you're around all day, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
you can answer questions offline. If you could, just before I call up Paul, if you could just join me in thanking Tony. Thank you very much, and you'll be around later. Thank you. Thanks, Tony. So now our second speaker of the morning is Paul Clegg, also from DCMS. And Paul's going to give us an outline on the DCMS's latest thinking with regard to a potential competition around 5G rural connected communities. So I'll just try and stall while you find the PowerPoint.
So
Got it, Paul.
I don't use Macs.
Oh, sorry.
Where's the right mouse button? Great. Thanks, John. Okay, so rural connected communities. Keyword there being proposal. So this sets out, based on Tony's presentations, our latest thinking on how we can address some of these issues raised around rural connectivity through the 5G TNT programme. So some of our thinking I'll take us through. It's firmer than some of our other thinking. So this is really an opportunity to hear from you. We don't want to design, programme, launch a competition that isn't fit for purpose. So kick off. So I think Tony's covered why we want to do this. So the policy rationale, the context in which this project operates is more and more activity, socioeconomic activities moving online, be it retail, banking, be it home technologies like smart meters, being people ordering prescriptions, education, access to educational tools. So with this shift from traditional ways of receiving and sending and sharing information, everything's moving online. So if you don't have the capability to get online, there's going to be a problem. And that problem is going to have a negative impact on the economy of a region, but also the social mobility within a region, the attainment of individuals within that region. It's going to cascade a whole bunch of problems. So why is nothing happening about this? Why isn't this big problem being fixed? Well, the economics of telecoms infrastructure deployment are challenging. There's a reason that people aren't addressing this problem. By people, I mean MNOs largely. So that's the why. But why 5G? So the FTIR concluded that 5G offers opportunities that previous technologies don't. There's a recommendation within the FTIR that Ofcom consider new models of spectrum sharing that not only continue competition between the MNOs, but also provides access to other market entrants. So you mentioned the 3 gig upper end of the spectrum. So there are 2 kind of consultations that Ofcom launched recently, one around the 700 and 3.2 to 3.6 gigahertz auction, and another about innovative technologies. Those 2 consultations closed earlier in the year, and as Tony said, Ofcom are considering, and we're in discussions with them about that, but it's close competition, so I can't really say more. But, you know, we are aware it's a policy position that we need to be more flexible, we need to allow more opportunities for accessing spectrum. And then the second thing is around 5G itself, the nature of the technology. You can do more stuff with 5G than you can previously. On the supply side, you can deploy stuff more cheaply, more easily than you can, say, with 4G. There's a less reliance on hardware. You can do more with software. And on the demand side, we think there are use cases out there to be identified. There's demand out there that 5G can help meet. So that is why 5G. So this is the firmer bit of our thinking. This, briefly, is how we want to deliver a project that addresses this problem. So we're thinking about capital grant funding for around 4 to 6 projects within the UK. It could be more, it could be fewer, depending on the nature of the bids that we receive. And as I said, that's across the UK and in a range of rural settings where there are demonstrable connectivity challenges, where there are not spots and where there are partial not spots. These are the problem areas where we want to be funding activity. So that activity, we want to build the business case for investment in 5G, build the evidence base for rural mobile connectivity through doing 3 things. So identifying and testing different coverage models, demand-led coverage models. So learning from MIP, we don't want to go out there and build stuff. We want to hear back, where there are areas that could benefit from different approaches to coverage. A key bit of this program is innovation. It is a research and development program primarily. 5G, it's a new generation technology. We want to see innovative technical solutions and innovative commercial approaches, like sharing. And thirdly, as I said, so looking for use cases. So where can 5G make a difference? Where's the demand and how can we demonstrate that demand to help build the business case for 5G investment? And then the next set of bullets. So we don't want to see projects that benefit people who run networks and help their profits. We find for that to happen, but we need to see a tangible contribution to the local economy and the local community. And this is it's a government project. We need to see the socio-economic impact. Projects need to be quite outward-looking, we think. They can't operate in isolation. They need to be part of a burgeoning, increasing 5G ecosystem within the UK. So they need to be cognizant of all other activities that are taking place across our programme, but also other stuff that's happening. They need to reach out across the UK and help build the evidence base nationally to show the UK as a country where 5G is happening, where it's happening across a lot of places, and where it's delivering positive outcomes. Sustainability, it's kind of a third key priority of the programme. We don't want to spend a few years building infrastructure in a part of the UK or testing different models, testing different technologies, bringing benefits to the local community and local economy, and after the period of grant funding, rip it all down and leave, with everyone kind of saying, what just happened? We can't get a signal anymore, or you've just ripped away something that we were relying on. So a key thing is looking for everything that we do to be commercially sustainable beyond the duration of our funding. So it needs to, as well as looking outwards, wanting to be a part of the 5G ecosystem, looking back, so what's happened before, not just thinking about your MIPs, your national roamings, but also looking at the phase 1 project, so 5 grids were mentioned. You saw a slide on 5G rural first. There's a lot of learning out there. UK 5G are very good at bringing together that learning, at sharing that learning. So just kind of anything we fund now, it has to be newer than what we've done before. It has to build on and move further. And then given that this is an R&D programme, it's government funding, we need to be very aware that all projects need to comply with state aid regulations and public procurement rules, and also include consortium match funding. So given the nature of this programme, depending on what kind of R&D activity is within your project, and depending on the size of industry partners within your consortium, we would expect to see some degree of private sector match funding to match the public sector funding that we will be investing. Okay, so that's kind of the high-level summary slide of what we think this programme should achieve. So where exactly are we looking to run these test beds and trials? So rural area, and that can either be one contiguous area or multiple sites where there's a strong rationale for why you're doing it. So it can be one place or multiple places, but why are they interlinked? What is the purpose of that separation between sites that allows you to test something? And our definition of rurality, I think, should meet that applied by your host countries. So England and Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, each have their own definition of rurality based on geography, scarcity of population, distance from the nearest major conurbation. So that's what we mean by rural. And what we mean by poor connectivity, so yes, there is publicly available data. We'd expect you to look at that to demonstrate poor or patchy connectivity, but also we do appreciate that Ofcom don't always get it right. So any supporting evidence that you have, any of your own research, any of the information that you've gathered by getting into a truck and driving around saying, look, what Ofcom is saying, it's not quite right. We want to see that too, because you know your areas best. So we'd expect to see something from Ofcom, publicly available data, but also your own findings. And in scope, we've got a couple of pictures there. We know there are lots of different rural types, and we would hope to see bids from a range of different types of rural locations, from very remote parts of the country, sparsely populated, largely for agricultural land use, all the way to mountainous regions, coastal regions, but also thinking about urban edge areas, semi-rural areas, because each type of location presents its own challenges. So we want to see a range of challenges and a range of solutions to meet those challenges. So that's the where. So who are we looking for to put in bids? What kind of organisation, what kind of entity do we think these bids should come from? Well, as I said, there's no one definition of rural, there's no single type of rural area. And each type will require different organisations, different collections of individuals to come together, to work together in devising a project to start addressing some of those problems. So we're looking for consortia. So not just a single organisation, at least two, maybe more organisations, which can include anyone with the relevant expertise, experience, funding, and that could be from the public sector, so local and other public authorities, private sector, so network providers, altnet providers, suppliers, vendors. Third sector, academia, has played quite an influential role in previous projects we funded, so perfectly accept them to be part of any consortia. And in terms of who should lead that consortium, so unlike previous projects, we're not stipulating who should be leading a consortium. All that we ask is that they demonstrate the capability to lead delivery of the project and to provide leadership across those others within the consortium to ensure that delivery happens. So this is an example of a consortium. It's not the example I recommend. So 5G Rural First, a very, very complicated bunch of stakeholders. Over 30 different organisations came together, led by Cisco, to deliver Rural First. I'd say it was not without its challenges for that consortium. If you think about it, one analogy would be, when you have your monthly programme board meeting, who do you want around the table with you? This number of people around the table, can you deliver a project? Or do you want 30 odd people around the table? We're not setting a limit, but it's something to bear in mind. So this is kind of opening up our thinking a bit now. So what would we expect a bidding consortium or a successful consortium that's been through the bidding process to deliver? So as I said, be led by a single organisation. We want to see a clear leader, someone who sticks their hand up, they're in charge, they're our go-to person or body. We want to see evidence of public and private sector partnership, although there may be potential consortia where there is no public sector, no private sector partnership. Unusual, but if they can demonstrate that they can meet the objectives of the project, then so be it. But if there are local authorities in the area of a project, we'd expect them to be in the consortium. You know, they're very important locally, given their responsibility for assets in the area, given their relationship with public sector delivery within the area, given their strategic role within the area. So we'd expect to see a focus on place and for local authorities to be involved. Industry as well, we would expect to see industry being involved, given that local authorities, the majority of which may not have the knowledge, the expertise to build a network, say, in challenging circumstances. So we would expect to see industry, but not necessarily. And planning permission. So planning permission is a barrier in many ways. So any organisations that can help overcome those barriers, thinking about planning permission, way leaves, that kind of thing, we would hope that they would be involved in a consortium also to help smooth the deployment of the project. Has access to the spectrum and network required to deliver the project. And we've heard quite a bit about spectrum. I said Ofcom are considering, so we would need to see evidence of the way in which you will get the spectrum that you need to build the network that you need. And finally, I kind of already touched upon this, but asset owners, so anyone who owns stuff, we'd want to see them involved. There are complexities. We'd need to work through, you need to think through, you know, so publicly owned infrastructure can be contracted out, there can be PFI deals, you know, it can become quite complicated. I think we are looking for those with the ability to own and manage those relationships. It's the first slide, so it carries on. In your consortium, there should be at least one organisation that can look after all the 5G stuff. This second bullet, so we need to think about scalability and replicability of these testbeds and trials. So we would expect to see either, and this is kind of maybe not necessarily applicable in all rural connected communities projects, but someone that can operate or invest at a national level. Or if not that, a consortium should be able to demonstrate a model or key bits of which that can be replicated outside the local area. You know, we're looking to growing the 5G ecosystem, building the evidence base. You may have a very local and specific solution that works for you, that's fine, but if there are bits of that, or if there's a model, or if there's thinking that can be replicated, then that is good. You know, that's what we want to see. And then thinking about use cases, so we want to see use cases, we want to see demonstration of demand, and we'd expect therefore to see in a consortium representation at both ends, so those who need the stuff and those who can provide the stuff, whatever that stuff may be, and fiscal responsibility, program oversight. Anyone who's bringing anything to the table needs to demonstrate that they have the authority to spend, to make decisions within the consortium. So that's our thinking around the type of organisation, the consortium, and the constitution of that consortium we need to deliver this. So consortia submit bids. We think a bid should contain a clearly defined vision, or not necessarily vision. Vision sounds a bit woolly, maybe a clearly defined business case. And that should set out your use cases, your applications and services that will form your bid, and the benefits that 5G will bring to them. So in scope, sufficient use cases. We want to see, you know, at least one use case, unless there's a very, very strong argument, unless you've got a fantastic technological solution that's unique and innovative, it's cutting edge, maybe you don't have a use case yet. Okay, you know, we consider that. But where there are use cases, we'd want to see that there's sufficient demand to attract investment and to make a real difference across the community, across the area. Within a within the bid, we want to see capacity for collaborative delivery by the consortium. So that is each component, each organisation within a consortium needs to have a clearly defined role, clearly defined set of responsibilities everyone's bringing to delivering this bid. So there's DCMS funding. Okay, there'll be a grant going to a winning consortium to contribute to funding the bid. We want to see in your application, well, what difference is that going to make? What is that going to, what does that mean to what you could do normally? You know, what difference does our funding make to not just doing the work, but the outcomes of that project? And then, in terms of risk management for us, in terms of project assurance for us, we need to see, sitting beneath this, fully costed delivery plan, setting out activities, people, milestones, deliverables, what success looks like, what are your other metrics, what is your risk register, what's your mitigation strategy. We need that assurance that you know what you're doing. And just pausing on critical success factors. This is an R&D project, you know, so success will be you've added to the evidence base, you've added to the business case. If it goes wrong, you know, wrong is okay, it's a part of research. If you set out to do something amazing, it doesn't quite work, but you learn a lot by doing it, you know, that is good. We'd prefer that you succeed, but you know, if that doesn't work out for whatever reason, then we need to see the evidence as to why. And kind of jumping down to the bottom bullet, because it's related, an M&E programme. You know, a strong M&E programme, monitoring and evaluation, indicating how you've met the objectives that you've set out, that you've agreed with us, and how you will measure those objectives. I'll jump back up again, sorry. So money, you know, clear financial plan, where the money's coming from, who's signing it off, when you plan to spend it, what you plan to spend it on, what are you buying, what are you building. Again, need to demonstrate the match funding as part of the state aid requirement. We've spoken about Rural Gigabit Connectivity Programme. There are others. There's the Barrier Busting Task Force. There are other programmes in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. There's a lot going on. We will try and help make sure that those connections are made, but we want to see that you know where those opportunities are as well. We want to see recognition that you're looking around you. You know, you're seeing opportunities, you're finding ways of joining up with them. Outside your consortium, there's going to be a lot of other people with an interest in your area. How are you going to manage them? You know, it's the classic four-grid stakeholder engagement. Who do you just inform that this is what you're going to do? And whom are you really, really going to engage with to make sure that's going to happen? How quickly are you going to do that? There may be some people, some end users within your proposal who may not be that tech savvy. That could be businesses, it could be individuals. You know, it could be people who are in receipt of healthcare, social care, education. It could be businesses who are demanding 5G to help them solve a problem, but don't necessarily know how 5G works. How are you going to upskill these end users? And M&E I've mentioned. So that's what we want to see, we think, in your bids. This is a little more discursive. We're not being descriptive. We're not being prescriptive. We're trying to be descriptive. What kinds of things could be in a bid? So in terms of commercial deployment models, approaches, as I said, we think 5G brings with it new opportunities, particularly around network sharing, spectrum sharing, roaming, localized roaming. It's much easier with 5G. Neutral host. There are others. You know, this isn't a checklist. These are just things that we think, based on conversations with people like you, based on conversations within the department, these are the kinds of things we would expect to see. And on the techie side, so as Tony said, you know, we're not really beholden to the strict definition of 5G. We're seeing 5G as helping to create a network of networks. So within that, there are lots of different things you could be doing. Some really interesting stuff around vRAN or multi-access orchestration that 5G enables, beamforming, network slicing, and thinking about bringing together through 5G, fixed mobile and satellite, for example. So again, others, there are lots and lots of stuff. You know, there's loads of interesting things. We want to see from you what is special, what can you bring, what interesting, innovative, new next generation solution can be a part of your bid. Nearly there. Use cases, I can't stress enough, use cases really are such an important part of this project. We want to see demonstrable demand being proved, being tested through new technologies, new models, and that could be across anything. Rural communities, the rural sector, shares a lot of possible use cases with urban, but then there's a lot that are unique to rural communities. Agriculture, fishing, forestry, salmon farming. But then thinking about the user experience for people who want more connectivity, so rural broadband, broadcast media, and then a big potential area that could generate use cases is in the public sector. So I've touched upon health, social care, education, transport, public safety, for example, tourism. I mean, the possibilities within tourism of using 5G-enabled technologies are very, very interesting. Remote infrastructure management, smart meters, utilities, public transport, infrastructure, bus stops, train stations, and so on. And others. This is not a definitive list. So final slide, what's our timeline for this? How do we see this running? So this is the third of 5 market testing workshops we've been running across the UK, the purpose of which is to check, validate, help inform our views by the people who know actually what we should be funding. So they're finishing next week. The final one did cut on Wednesday. Subject to the outcome of those workshops and ministerial clearance, and what you come back to us with, we aim to publish a launch competition before the summer to run for 8 weeks is our thinking, but and then projects to mobilise the end of the year, January at the earliest, and then finally these projects will be funded, grant funding from us, until March 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. So we do have some time for more questions. As Paul says, the actual competition briefing will be later. So if you have sort of minutiae questions about eligibility, etc., they might not be for today, because that's part of what we're trying to figure out and design questions in the workshop later. But again, if you have questions, if you could just say your name, where you're from, and your question, and we'll do our best to answer them. So, sir, your question over there.
Thank you. It's Steve Edwards from the Project Advisory Group. Thanks, Paul. It was really useful, I think. I've got a question and a bit of an observation. Is there any doubt that 5G will have the demand it needs? And the observation bit of that is there seems to be a lot of emphasis on use cases and some of the technology issues. Isn't this primarily an infrastructure problem for fibre and 5G? And shouldn't we just get on with that?
So, very good kind of two-part question. I think, so this project is not going to roll out infrastructure across the UK. It's not of that scale. We recognise, yes, that ideally is what we would be doing, but given the nature of this project, I think what we see this doing is demonstrating what is possible with 5G, what is cheaper, what is better with 5G, backed up by use cases that are available, so that then we can play that back to those who can roll out infrastructure on a national scale, such as the MNOs, and saying, look, you've not been here before, 4G's not worked, you're not putting fibre out, but look, there's a lot of people here who want connectivity, Here's what they want. Here's how they can get it. Here are the commercial opportunities for you to improve your return on investment. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Andy?
Good morning. I'm Claudio Poloni, head of engineering department at Lancaster. I would like to know what is the content of novelties that can be introduced in this bid, because obviously we talk of using probably off-shelf technology or something available, but due to the fact that the need to keep the cost low to find new solution, need also some advancement in technology and cost of technology. I would like to know if this is an element that should be important in these bids, or is expected that we use what is available?
So it's a research project, so we would be very open. In fact, we'd be keen to see new stuff, so stuff that hasn't gone to market, technologies that are in development, cutting edge. So it's part of what we need to think about is the technology readiness level. So there's a scale of that. So the more innovative stuff is going to be at one end, which is easier for us to fund in some ways, and stuff that is closer to going to market is harder to fund. So there are innovative technologies that we would like to see. However, recognising that 5G can help form a network of networks, a bid could include established technologies also.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Great. Oh. Go on then, you get a bonus one.
Too far.
Sorry, this was the most important question, and I forgot. Okay. So, I don't think you mentioned how much.
I was waiting for that one.
and again, just to get 2 for 1, any of that funding available for revenue costs? Not, is it all capital?
So I'll answer the second part first. It is all capital. The first part, I'll give a civil servant answer first, which is that, so the funding hasn't been agreed. It will depend on the outcome of these workshops. A more useful answer perhaps would be, we would be thinking of funding projects in the region of 2 to 5 million, bearing in mind that that would be central government grant funding, which we would expect to be match funded by industry within bids. And we would expect match funding. It would depend on the size of the businesses involved and also on the nature of the research, but match funding probably around 50%.
So Paul, that means that actually a project consortium can put in a project of £50 million or £100 million, but the grant funding is 2 to
Yes.
5 million.
It could be more. It depends on what we get back. It could be less, but roughly that region of funding.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're going to break for... Is there one more? Right, Andy, yeah? Well spotted.
Sorry, Peter from Cisco. Just when you say capital, do you mean standard project costs in the way that we would all understand them from the way the Wave 1's worked and everything like that? Yep. Okay. So I was wondering if there's any. I'm noting the timescale there and things that run over the summer. Okay. Is there anything that? Are there any learnings from the urban competition that would apply here in terms of the process that you've gone through with that? If anyone's got any insights that share?
I'd actually point to my colleague over here, Tony, who leads on that project, who's probably best placed to answer, Tony, if that's all right.
Yeah, don't do it again. Urban's a very specific approach, and the idea is to get a single region-wide test bed, which is a world first, to get something at that scale. And to do that, we asked the West Midlands to form a very particular governance structure that gave us the balance between a very committed local combined authority and local authority engagement and both predictable and controlled delivery together with a load of innovation. Now, you put those things together, they don't normally sort of fit into any kind of project structure. So we've taken quite a long time with them to get that right. It's now running, but I wouldn't suggest that we try and do that in the rural environment because I don't think we need to in the same way. So what we're going to do here is, as Paul described, more discrete, focused, but geographically dispersed projects across multiple areas. So you haven't got the same weight of kind of need there in the same way. So I think we've learnt a lot. There are probably some things that as we go through the sort of mobilisation process with whoever wins the competitions, which we'll certainly embed and share in more detail, but they're probably at the detail level rather than the kind of proposal level at this stage. Okay.
Thanks, Tony. We're going to have a short break, so thank you, Paul. If I could ask you, there's teas and coffees and waters and things outside. If I could ask you to grab something and bring them back for the workshop session. When you come back to tables, we've structured the session such that we'd like you to come back to 7 tables in total. So maybe those of you who are on this table could join another table, and then we've got the right number of tables for the session, please. Okay.